Welcome to Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman, a podcast celebrating unconventional choices and asking curious questions through the lens of a happy, child-free life. Every week, I chat with experts on today's most interesting topics, inspiring us to think differently, live intentionally, and find fulfillment on our terms. Whether you're child-free or seeking a space where parenthood isn't part of the conversation, you are welcome here. It's not about comparison, it's about possibility. Let's get curious together. Have you ever wondered why it is so hard to find clothes that fit, or how you could possibly be a completely different size from item to item or brand to brand? Do you ever feel guilty about fast fashion or worry about the waste our clothing cycles create? If so, me too. Today's guest, Sue Spencer, did not start in the fashion industry, and perhaps that's why she's the perfect person to shake things up. Sue was a NASA systems analyst trained to solve complex problems on a variety of topics, but when she turned her attention to clothing design, she realized the way we produce fashion is fundamentally problematic. Most of the waste in fashion is not about fast changing trends. It actually happens much further back in the process. That's where Sue and her open source fashion design platform Seamly comes in, empowering people to create custom fit patterns, reduce waste, and rethink how clothing is made. Welcome, Sue.
Hi, Emily. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. Okay, we're going to dive into all the details of what everything I just said means because I'm so fascinated by this invention and your foray into the fashion industry. And I really want to start there with your journey. It feels like it's probably rare to go from NASA into fashion. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and sort of how that shift in interests happened?
Sure. Well, I have a political science undergrad degree, and I decided not to be a lawyer and had been doing statistical analysis of electoral returns. And I went, oh, I kind of like computing. So I finished sort of the undergrad portion of a Bachelor of Science in computer science and then went straight to grad school. I kept going with my career and I did a lot of data center work. So I've not just worked for NASA, I worked for the Corps of Engineers, for the Air Force. I worked for Nashville Metro Waterworks, worked for Dollar General, worked for a lot of companies and a lot of hospitals, doing systems integrations, trying to figure out how to get their old legacy systems up to speed to talk to new systems. So it gets really complicated. This systems analysis is very, very, very complicated. And it has to do with analyzing the old ways and converting them into new ways. So I followed this path, and finally my last regular job was as a one of the data managers for NASA's Budget and Time Network. And it sounds glamorous, but it's just, jeans and t-shirts, you're running a data center. It's a data center. But we were handling
That sounds fancy.
the thing was we were handling the money. So that's not important. The other wing is where they were handling all the data that came from the ISS and from SALIS. They were important. We were just the money people. Only at NASA. Right.
I mean, money makes the world go round whether we like it or not. So, there's importance in that too.
Well, it's completely different. The emphasis is different. So I liked being in background like that. It was very nice because it suits my personality. So when I had that job, I decided I wanted to wear things besides jeans and tennis shoes and t-shirts. I want to wear the cool stuff I wore in college, which, it's not going to fit now because I'm a middle-aged lady. My body's very different. So things in the thrift store no longer fit because I'm a 14, 16, right in there. Thrift store, cool things do not fit if you're 14 or 16. It's like size 4, 6, 8, like I was in college, right? So I thought, well, I'll just make these things. And I went and bought sewing patterns because I've been sewing since I was 4. And the sewing patterns didn't fit. I thought, what is wrong here? Either it's me or them, or it's really both. Things fit when you're small and don't have many curves, turns out. But when you take those small sizes and grade them up in our grading system, you just get a bigger size that doesn't have many curves. Oh, no. That's not how people are. Can't just add a quarter and inch at the corners and at the waist and then different place and wind up with something that's going to fit, right? So that's why fashion stops making clothes about size 10 or 12 because the distortion is so great that it doesn't fit anybody. Those little coat hanger size, the people of 4, 6 size and 8 size, even size 10, they're not that curvy. So you get to size 12, 14, 16, 18, you've got lady curves. And it's just not designed for you. And I'm like, why is this? There are no exceptions to this. This is across the board. And I recognize the systems problem. I went, oh, okay. So my bored little mind went, I'm going to deal with this. So I'm going to go learn to make patterns, make them the right way. And it turns out most of these pattern systems have their start in the mid 1800s, most of them. And it's been kind of copy paste ever since. They sort of copy paste from each other. So there's not a real growth pattern there as to how the way that we design clothing. We design clothing today the way we did in the 1860s. We use the same grading system and sizing system that Butterick used for the first printed pattern in the 1860s. I mean, no wonder we can't get to the moon with fashion. We're still driving oxen carts. I mean, this is the difference in time frame that we're talking about. When they came up with these systems, my great grandfathers were driving their oxen cart to Montgomery for legislation and stuff like that. I mean, nobody had any tools to deal with complex numbers. So if I were a tailor, take a strip of linen, I'd measure your chest and cut it to that length and hang it on a wall. Measure your waist, cut it to that length, hang it on a wall, hips thing, and your height, and maybe your arm to arm measurement or back of your neck to your wrist. And that was it. And I had to make everything for you from those like 4 or 5 measurements. And I would put 3-inch seam allowances on everything so that I could adjust it, right? And this is custom made, really, or tailoring. But this is not something that we can do today. You can't make clothes like this with 3-inch seam allowances so that you can do an alteration once you bring it home. You know, we have a 1/4-inch seam allowances. You can't alter that at all. And the synthetic material, if you take out a seam, that hole from the needle is going to be there forever. You'll always see it. Our clothes are not alterable. So these people are saying, well, make do and mess. Like, maybe if you had organic materials like cotton, silk, and wool, like we used to, maybe you could get one. You can't even do that, the synthetic materials. So backing up, the systems that we're using to create clothes are 150 years old. And we're using just a handful of measurements because that's all they could handle at the time. Not because that's the way you're supposed to do it. They were making do with that. Now we have 3D body scanners. There is no reason in the world, like any brand in the world today, is basing their sizing on chest, waist, hips, and height, other than that's the way it's been done. Not that this is the best way to do it. So that is the base problem. The number of measurements that we're using are too small. It's a short list and it's not going to fit you. You know, it's not going to fit you if you're over a size 8 or 10. Just guaranteed. That's why people don't even go into plus sizes. Brands say that, well, we don't want that market. And what they really mean is we can't fit that market. We don't know how. 2/3 of women are size 14 and above. But only 10% of brands make clothing in those sizes because they don't know how. They have to start with brand new base size and then grade it up. So the second part of the problem is not just the few measurements that we're using, it's that we're using grading to go from size to size. And any person in fashion that I say this to just about faints. What are we going to do? It's like, well, you can have boutique sizing. And you can have a matrix of sizing instead of linear sizes. Like we have petite, regular, tall. Okay, that's one sort of matrix. And then we have size 0 to 52. If you use more measurements, you can have one base pattern that does all of those sizes. And you can mark it to those striated or matrix of sizes, petite, regular, and tall, by just creating one pattern that can create all sizes. And I call this one pattern to rule them all because I'm a big nerd.
Not nerdy.
No, there are other matrices here, right? It's called bust size. And what they do right now in pattern making, it's a manual adjustment. Well, we're going to go in and do a manual adjustment for this bust size. It's like, if you're designing correctly and you use a high bust measurement and a bust measurement, you don't need a manual adjustment. It happens automatically. Their pattern making techniques are from the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s that linger till today. But the problem is they're not using the right measurements that you can now get from a 3D body scanner. And they're not creating any design in all sizes. You'll see designs in petites that are always really beautifully tailored and they're gorgeous. And I wish they were in regular. They don't make them in regular, right? But petites to look nice, they're very concerned about their proportion and everything. So they're a little more picky. So I wish petite clothing fit me because it's always fabulous. And then if you get into plus sizes, you'll see that the cloth selection is much cheaper. The designs are less interesting and they're more tacky. They will put like glue things on, but it's really a pillowcase with a belt. So
Yes.
you know, so there's the opposite end. Plus sizes, it's not most of those designs I've seen, they're not very attractive. It's not the same designs that you see in petite and regular. So what they're doing is designing for these separated markets, and that's an artificial separation. It doesn't matter. You should be able to design something and it's available for all sizes, but you have to do it the right way. And they're doing it this old way where you have to have one base size for petites, another base size for regulars, another base size for talls, another base size for plus size. And unfortunately, where the majority of women live, what their sizes is between size 12 and 20. Nobody really pays attention to them because it's neither regular nor is it plus size. It's not that 0 to 10 to 12 size that you can find petites, regulars, and talls in. And you jump straight over at least a third of the market to get to the plus size, which is another third of the market, right? And it goes these difficulties in marketing and production and goes back to the methodology. So I studied over 100 different pattern making systems to figure this out. And
This is amazing.
none of
Yeah. None of them worked, right?
I had this big database. I started typing in, well, this system uses these measurements and it fits here, but not over there. And this system uses these measurements and it fits here, but not over there. And it started to become clear. I started focusing on and proving with the data how you should create and design clothing so that it can fit anyone, but you need the right measurements. Then you also need to understand that you can do it, that these markets aren't actually different. The range of human experience, the more experience you have, the more curves you're going to have, and the more money you're going to have to spend on clothes too. They're sort of ignoring that as well. But us ladies with an income, we will spend it if it fits, but we can't find it, so we just buy.
That's right.
We just buy the stretchy pants, right, and the expensive purse, and say, okay, this is as good as it gets. So I went out and translated, figured out how to do it with the math, and then translated that into the smallest sort of mathematical functions you could create, these atoms of functions to recreate all the more complex ones. And then I went through it and studied all the pattern making manual methods, these techniques that you do on a sheet of paper to draw a pattern, and translated them into algebra. Most of the papers I read out there, even just these drawings that you do with a compass and ruler and pencil, that is usually expressed in calculus. So I had to translate from calculus into algebra and then dumb that down from like complicated algebra down to desktop math that's equivalent to like 10th grade math so that people could actually use the system. And then to display these pattern objects graphically, I had to go in and create new graphics objects as scalable vector graphics. So just the points themselves associated with the label, which in the label itself was associated with a variable and blah, blah, blah. It got really technical and complicated to have all three of these areas, the math, the pattern making, and the graphics all intertwined. And then relate that into a program and then have the result of that program be something that can be human and computer readable, that is non-proprietary, so anyone can use it. It's interoperable with any system. And there are a lot of things that I look for as a systems analyst is like, okay, this is going to solve a lot of problems. So as I went, I kept building in other constraints that I know are needed for robust systems that benefit the majority of people that are going to try to use it. So I know this is all nerd talk, but this was the journey, right? There's nothing out there. You just learn it by rote. So I'm so inherent behind all of this, and you can do things that actually work and actually fit no matter who you are. The same thing can fit you and your cat.
I mean, there's so much here. This is incredible what you've done. And I love the vision because innovation requires vision, right? You're creating something completely new. You've created something completely new. But it's so fascinating. Like, if I think about this, I want to talk about the consumer side, but the brand side, like the fact that these companies are using this outdated of technology with the pattern system, it makes so much sense when you explain it. Like if we think of the history of fashion and consumerism, when everything was bespoke, made to measure, tailored, and that was the way we got clothes. And you went to your neighborhood shop and your neighborhood tailor, and that's how you had garments. Then we transitioned to the department store and and beyond and beyond and beyond, kind of scaling up production without scaling up the pattern making process, right? So they don't have that leeway, and we're kind of using these bulk. It's not one size fits all, but sort of, right? Like there's just a handful of choices that work for so few people. And then that was just like extrapolated out into a mass production system.
Right. And the reason why they're using is Joe Gerber, the guy that invented G code. G stands for Gerber. And he was instrumental in creating printers and circuit boards and all kinds of things. Gerber technology is a big name in computer aided design. And you also hear Gerber technology in terms of pattern making software, right? And here's the thing, Joe Gerber was sent to a 6-week pattern making class for dressmaking in Vienna. And the system that he learned is a system that's based on the body proportions, chest, waist, hips, and height. You use body proportions to fill in all the missing measurements because they didn't have 3D body scanners then. So fill in all the missing measurements with body proportions. And those body proportions are those of a tall, thin Northern European, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe 10% of the global population fits that. And so this is where we get that 8 heads relationship. Oh, your body is 8 heads. No, it's not. If you're Korean, it's not. If you're from Kenya, it's not. You're taller than that, or you're shorter than that, or whatever. But your head is going to be about the same. Or if you're from Central America, you're high altitude, right? You're gonna be stockier. Your shoulders are gonna be wider than others, than someone who's from a Mediterranean or sea level environment, because your rib cage is bigger. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen here. So body proportions do not serve us well. It's sort of a starting place if you're a beginner, but if you're a real pattern maker, you want to fit somebody, body proportions is not where you want to go, right? Unless you've got those 3-inch seam allowances so you can make the changes that you need, right? So we have all these assumptions built into our method, but we've dropped all the things that make those assumptions work. So when he designed an electronic cutting table, right, with 100 layers of fabric, and it's vacuum packed down with a sheet of plastic, and you go through with a jigsaw to cut all the pieces out, he wrote software to lay out the pieces to maximize fabric usage. So there's no waste. So he's fashion oriented, but it's mass production based on these sizes. He did not question the system that he learned as a 13-year-old in Vienna. So it's really nice that we respect his work so much that we're not going to change it. His focus was the electronics, not the software.
Got it. So he applied technology, but to the old measurements and to the old systems of measurements, which again serve so few people. Like even on the petite side or whatever, like I feel like so few people can walk into a store. And this also varies from store to store, where you feel like, oh, I can just walk in and pick something up and it'll fit me perfectly. Like so few people have that experience, no matter what your size is. And our bodies change throughout our life as well. So it sounds like everything, like technology has changed. And all of this is before Seamly, what you created. So up until Seamly, technology would change to speed up or increase production, but the root of what they were actually cutting to or how they were measuring or making things was not updating.
Correct. That's correct. Just ignore the design portion because the design portion of fashion is still, and to be fair, it's not in the 1860s world. It's more like in the 1930s world right now. Our current fashion design workflow reflects the design workflow of the automotive industry from the 1930s, where they would create a clay version of the car. There's a structure like a wooden box structure underneath, and then they've got these curves. And then they would send in illustrators to draw that, and then the engineers would convert those drawings into blueprints and schematics that would then be manufactured. Now, if you see these cutesy little pictures of a tailor shop or a designer shop, fashion design, and there's a rack of oak tag patterns on the back wall, that is 1930s. That's what we're talking. They're gonna do another pattern. So they pull one out and they trace that off, and then they do all their flat pattern making to, let's rotate this dart, let's add a tap, let's do this, add in some ease and slash the spread, all the things to that piece of paper that they've traced off from the oak tag pattern that's been hanging on the wall. And that oak tag pattern is the only thing that ensured sizing consistency across design to design within a brand house.
Mm, okay. So they had like a pattern that would be like a 6, and they would use that whether it was a dress, trousers, whatever.
But they start every single product from scratch, from that many times.
Okay.
And this is what people are still doing today. And then the result, they digitize that, take a photograph or whatever, and then import it into Gerber or whatever software they're using. But that full initial portion of design is manual. Quality and consistency depends upon the skill of the pattern maker. And there's at most 200,000 pattern makers in the world making clothes, designing all the clothes for billions of people.
Mm,
You can't reuse an old pattern because none of the formulas or anything that was used to make that pattern is stored in the pattern. It's just an outline like a cookie cutter. So if you make a change, you don't know really what you're changing. You might be introducing risk and you've got to walk the seams manually from pattern piece to pattern piece. It's crazy how much manual work goes into this and how many problems are in the pattern when it gets to the manufacturer. The manufacturers are left with this pattern that doesn't fit anybody, where the seams don't line up, and they have to fix it on the manufacturing floor. They just find somebody, it's like, hey, you sewist number 5, come up here, let's try this on you. Does it fit? That's how they fix things. And because it's not the design itself, what we're giving to the manufacturers is less than useful. There's just no way to have a conversation from the manufacturer has no way. There's no way to make a note. There's no engineering conversation. This is not the process that they have in automotive or aerospace or architecture or any of the other industrial design and manufacturing sectors. Fashion is the only industrial design and manufacturing sector that doesn't really utilize CAD/CAM the way that it should. So Seamly introduces all the best practices from those systems to create a design that's not an outline. The design file is a set of formulas that you add measurements to, and then it adjusts to those measurements. And those measurements can be sizing measurements that meets your expectation of a size 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all the way up to 52 or more. I think it's designed to do most people so that you can have the same design for any of the markets that you want to go after. And you don't have to have a whole nother set of sizing if you go into the Asian market or if you go into South America or you're going, you don't have to change anything. You just add your different sizes and you don't have to do any extra effort. So that's a nice thing for you as a brand. But the way that consumers benefit from this is that the sizing is consistent. You buy a shirt this fall and go, I really like this. And you go back, like right now, I will go back to find a shirt that fits the same brand. And guess what? It doesn't fit. Even across different colorways. If you see a shirt and it fits you and it's this color and this material, you find the same shirt, same size, and a different material. It fits differently because there are no variables in that pattern to adjust for the way the material behaves. So with Seamly, you can introduce variables such as thickness or stretch or whatever, and it will adjust the numbers to correct the amount of ease that you need for that particular fabric. Because the less stretch it is, the more stiff that fabric is, the more ease you're going to need to move around in it.
mm-hmm. I've definitely experienced that. I want to get into this consumer side more, but I know exactly what you mean. When I've ordered a pair of jeans, they fit perfectly. Then I get them in black wash, and the black wash denim, it has like a whole new layer of stiffness, and they're way too tight, or the length is a little bit different. Like I think we've all experienced that frustration. So how, and if this is proprietary, you can tell me that too, but
No,
how
no,
do you
Seamly.
get
It's open source goodness. So one of the things that Seamly does as being a non-proprietary file format that you can export your design into Seamly and then import it into something else. And so we've been told that these brands are using Seamly as a Rosetta Stone between systems.
That's super encouraging. And I could see, I mean, there's so much margin for error when we're going in and out of all these programs without Seamly, right? And doing it the old way and like using all this technology that none of it's really working or talking to each other. I see that margin for error for sure. So with what you've created, I love that it's open source. And for anyone, let's just quick give a definition. What does open source mean?
It means that if you have software running on your system, you should be able to adjust that software and make contributions to it so that it meets your needs.
Got it.
And
Okay.
what most people do these days, though, and that was in the early days of open source. So, anyway, I'm really stoked about being open source. But in the early days, people would say, okay, I have this piece of software and it needs to do this thing or it's crashing under this case. So I'm going to open up my tools, my developer tools, and make the fix and then send it back to the initial developer just as a friend. It's like, oh, here, I fixed this for you. Have a nice day.
Hmm.
Well, these days, people will use your software and go, hey, this is crashing. You need to fix this. I'm like, oh, well, it's free, right? Well, yeah, it's supposed to be free. And just take it for granted that there's a corporate sponsor. Seemingly, even though we're in over 70 countries and I have like over 47,000 people in my email list that have checked the box and want to be kept up to date with news, we don't have a corporate sponsor. No one, I pay for it. My husband pays for it. This is our labor of love to the world. So, like,
Yes, and it is. And we thank you. Because I mean, you're changing an industry that has been like archaic in this way without most of us realizing it. And the frustrations and, the fallout of that just lands on the consumer. So the work that you're doing is important. And I like that you're making it accessible, even though I'm sure there would have been an easier or less expensive for you way to build this. I think the accessibility is so key. And I'm curious, like, how, if the way that people, like the measurements we were using before, that's not working, right? So you mentioned 3D body scans. Like, how do you teach Seamly, or how is it getting its data so that it can have the right fit across this matrix of so many different bodies?
okay, well, let's talk about 3D body scanners for just a minute. The 3D body scanning industry has received the majority of its funding from the fitness industry. Developers, they don't know anything about pattern making. They don't know anything about physical fitness either. They're the people giving the money say, we just need circumferences. We need these circumferences. They don't need to know where that circumference is placed. There's no accuracy, right? So you get a chest circumference. Well, where the heck is that? Is it way up here? Like if you're 14, or is it way down here? Whenever you get a circumference in 3D body scanning, you know how high that is from the floor, but they're not publishing that. It's not part of what they share with their clients. Like, okay, if you get a waist circumference, how far is that from the floor? How far is it from your shoulder or the back of your neck? That's so subjective and it can be so wrong. Even with body scanning, it's a derivative. So you got your landmarks. 3D body scanning takes landmarks, your shoulder tip, your, bust points, your
Mhm.
belly button, your crotch level. And so whenever you get a body scan, you need to make sure that your legs are far enough apart that your thighs don't touch. Otherwise, the whole thing is going to be screwed up. And they won't tell you that. And then the second photo needs to be with your legs together so that they get your actual height. But they need to get the thigh circumference and make sure where your crotch level is, and then they can measure from that down to your instep, and then the distance between your instep is. So that triangle defines your the math. It's all math. It's crazy desktop silly 10th grade math that I'm begging people in the 3D body scanning industry to implement. It's like, well, nobody else has told us we need that. It's like, yeah, I know. That's the problem.
Sue, I feel like there's money in this. Like, I just want to be like, how are you not a billionaire yet? Like, this is the whole fashion industry.
Lack of experience in fashion among people with money in this country. The reason why we don't have any fashion in this country is that we use that as a trading chip. Say, okay,
Mhm.
you get this, we'll let you have all the apparel manufacturing in Mexico or wherever you want, Vietnam, all the things, and we will buy that, and you will buy this from us.
Mhm.
That's been the exchange, right? A lot of people now feel that those exchange deals aren't all that great, but I think that we could probably do better with having apparel manufacturing in this country because the difference, once you add in shipping and all the things, there's not that much difference between something that's manufactured here, even with labor rates, and having something manufactured in Vietnam and shipped over. and then the distribution costs and all the tariffs, not just that, but all the expenses that get laid upon that, and you add all that together, and the total cost is not a lot different than just having it made here and then having lower distribution costs. So that's a big discussion right there. But when you're in school, it's all, well, what's the labor rate? You want to get that labor rate to the minimum, and then you're going to be profitable. It's like, well, when you lay off your last laborer, you had infinite profits, right? So that's not an accurate model.
Mm.
That it be more sophisticated than that. But you can do a manufacturing facility here in this country and make money. It's just that we have to import the fabric to do it, and all the textiles are made overseas as well. So there's a whole vertical stack that needs to be rebuilt here in America if we're going to do that. And we buy 97% of our apparel from overseas. And the Department of Defense has decided that this is an economic risk. So we really need to bring it back. But we need the fabric, and we need to sew it, and we need the manufacturing facilities. But that's not a big hurdle. It's really not that big. I mean, it's not as complicated as building up an automotive industry or bringing the industrial computer chip manufacturing back to America, which they're involved in. But the lack of understanding of the fashion industry is what's keeping VCs from investing in rebuilding the tech stack for apparel in this country, whereas they will very gladly put that money into rebuilding the computer chip tech stack, manufacturing tech stack. They'll do that because they understand that. But they've never been close to the apparel industry, so they don't know what can happen there. And they're not going to invest in something that they don't know, that they're not familiar with. It's just that they don't understand it. And they don't know what the profits could be if you do it the right way. Result of our design system creating clothing that only fits a size 0 to 10, maybe to 12 for women. And the same thing can be said for men. There's just a very small range of sizing that our design systems can serve. They can only serve 30% of the market. So they make more of these and get them distributed around. This was the model when we had like brick and mortar stores, right? I guess it's still the model online. So you make all of these things. Hopefully somebody will see it and they can wear it, and then they'll buy it. So all of this marketing and distribution and thing to get it in front of as many people as possible so that the people who can fit it see it and buy it. And they're not really worried about serving the 2/3 of the market that they can't fit. This is why we have overproduction.
That's what I wanna get into, this world of waste. Because, yeah, which I mean, one thing I have to say, like, you and I are both entrepreneurs, so I'm hearing so much white space, so much room for innovation in this industry and for people with funding, and, I love to hear all of this room where people aren't already investing and putting resources to this, because that means those of us who do understand it and care about it and see the consumer equation, we can do something differently. So that's really exciting. But profits are one way to think about business, of course, and like we all need to make money. But this equation of waste and like what is happening in the textile world. I mean, we've had conversations here before about sustainability and kind of this transition from citizen to consumer that happened after World War II, which is like heavily discussed in episode 4. If anyone hasn't listened to that, put that on your queue next, because it was eye opening to me. Episode number 4 with sustainability expert Ashley Piper. She's really studied a lot of kind of how we became consumers at the hand of marketing and advertising and sort of the need to fuel the production machine that we had created, which is fascinating for lots of reasons across lots of industries. But in fashion, like when I'm hearing what you just said, I mean, I grew up like mall culture all the way. The mall was like the mecca. That's where we went for fun. That's where I went with my mom. I have a million happy memories. And even when I was much younger, I would think, what happens to all this stuff? It's like the whole floor set changes every season, or maybe more frequently than that, depending on the brand. Where does all this stuff go? But when you're 12, you're just kind of like, I don't know. Then when I got older and I worked in the fashion industry as my kind of starting in my career, and then now doing what I can to learn about sustainability, we see these terrifying videos and images of rivers overseas just like drowning in textiles. Like, what is going on? What is kind of the core? I think most of us think it's like, oh, we're buying too much fast fashion, but where is the waste really coming from in this equation?
This is not the consumer pulling the change. The consumer is not driving this problem. It's supply side that's driving this problem. They overproduce so that they can get it out in front. They don't know who's going to buy it, right? This is hugely speculative. And they're not making the sizes that are needed by all people. So the overproduction is this bad. Let me explain. Out of 100 garments made, right, only 60 are purchased. 40 out of 100 are never even touched by a consumer. 1 to 2% maybe wind up in a carpet in Dalton, Georgia, if they're the right kind of polyester. But most of that polyester in today's clothes, not the kind of polyester that you can recycle. Did you know that? And we're like, oh, recycle, not the right kind of polyester, kids.
Mm.
Recycling is not going to save us with fashion. So, and you can't alter this stuff because of the things we talked about before. Seam allowance widths are too small, and the material itself is that synthetic where if a needle goes through it, it's a hole forever. So it goes to, guess what? It doesn't go to Africa anymore. They are not letting so many countries, those coastal Western Africa countries, will not let a ship dock if it's got used clothing from the United States. So it's going now to go into South America, and they're just taking it, or Peru, whatever, and they take it straight up to the Andes and dump it. And
Interesting.
the Common Desert is one place, and I guess that caught on fire about 3 years ago from the fast fashion, the polyester, because it's hot up there. It's the desert. It's probably the place on the earth that has received the least rainfall in a million years or something like that. It's a crazy place. And they just take stuff because, what are you going to do up there? Nothing, because it's so dry. It's got this very delicate ecosystem, but there's dumping clothes. It's all clothes. And this polyester gets really hot and it becomes smoldering. And it's not even like on fire. It's like just this ring of smolder,
Oh my gosh.
getting off all of this toxic fumes into the atmosphere because it's polyester, synthetic. This is not good.
It's
So,
terrifying. Honestly, I find it so scary. I mean, this podcast, we're talking about solutions, right? And you are on the proactive solution side of this with what you've developed with your technology. But yes, like I feel like we can't turn a blind eye. And I do believe we have responsibility as consumers. And for the one thing, it makes me feel better to think about what's in my control and buying less and shopping less and not buying synthetic things and all of that. But let's take it back one step further, which I don't think people stop and think. We just haven't been conditioned to pause what is happening in the supply chain. Like, why am I always so tempted with something new every 3 weeks? It's because they're creating something new, like it's toxic.
well, it depends. It depends. If it was organic clothing, it's like nothing wrong with that because fashion is a language that's moving so much faster than anything else. Social trends are so fast. And this is communication. We express who we are. If you're 13 years old, you're going to express yourself. You know who you are, and you know who your
Mhm,
friends are, and you know who you want to be like.
mhm,
Your
mhm.
aspirational self, right? Your current self, your aspirational self, your creative self, all of those things, your intellectual self, your imaginative, all those things wind up in your clothes, your choice of clothing. And it is so important. And we forget that this is a language. And kids know this. And then we forget we go to work and we're like, oh, well, I'll go to wear khakis and polos or whatever and clean shoes.
Yeah.
And have
Look
platform,
like drones. Yeah.
not wear your Doc Martens to work. Well, there's a lot of things that happen, but our clothing is a language, and this has been going on as long as we've been humans. We've adorned ourselves with beads, with textiles, with furs, skins, rope, knots, tattoos, all the thing, jewelry, because it's an expression. It is an expression of who we are. This is part of our humanity. We have verbal language, right? This is what makes us human. We need to acknowledge that as humans, clothing is important and stop feeling guilty for wanting something new because you have a character arc. You are not a character in a cartoon that's the same frame after frame after frame. And there's nothing wrong with changing that out. So I just want to be clear here. Creativity is important, and buying new clothes is a great thing, or making new clothes or expressing yourself in different ways. Those are great things. We're made to do that. We shouldn't suppress this aspect of us, right? But here's what's going on with when you have 40% of everything that's made every year goes to the garbage or is burned or whatever, 2% or less is resold for another
Mm.
price. The rest of it, 38%, goes to garbage. So that 60% that people take home that buy, guess what? 20% of that gets returned primarily due to poor fit. And the 40% that doesn't sell, primarily due to poor fit. The 20% that's returned, primarily due to poor fit. So you get 40% unsold, 20% that's sold and returned. Together, that's 60% of every year's production gets thrown away. Returns don't get resold, by the way. The cost of handling it, getting it back inside, it's just too great. It's cheaper just to throw it away. So to put this in more stark contrast, out of every 5 factories that's making clothing, 2 factories are making clothing that will never be bought. 1 factory is making clothing that would be bought and returned. So only 2 factories out of 5 are actually making clothing that people want, primarily poor fit. So guess what? You fix the fit, you're going to fix that waste. You can have all 5 factories pumping out stuff if you want that people actually buy because people aren't averse to buying. Like I said, this is a natural drive, right? And we can address the lack of natural fibers in our clothing as a different discussion. That's a whole different topic, but it's important here. I mean, imagine if you had a business and you knew that all of your profits were going to be made from 40% of what you produced and 60% of everything you did, all the labor, all the utilities, all the interest on your loans, all the salaries, 60% of that is for nothing. You get nothing back for that. Everything rests on the profits that you can generate from 40% of what you make. Where is that going to drive you? Right? You're going to make t-shirts and you're just going to change the graphic pattern on them every week or something. They say, oh, new designs every day, every week. It's not really this different design. It's the same product with a different textile print on top. Maybe they put the tuck from over here, over there, or there's no tuck, or there's 5 tucks, but it's tiny little things. There's not been a whole lot of change in design lately.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're highlighting these specific stats on the percent of things that are produced and never see the light of day, or they do, but that we all know that in the e-com world, returns are a huge thing, and it is primarily because of fit. And going back to everything we've discussed, you have something in one color. I just assumed I could buy it in every color. Oh, wait, now I'm returning 4 of them because it really only fits in red. All of this is extrapolated into this problem. And I'm glad that you highlighted those statistics. And it feels encouraging to me, like whatever each of us and everybody listening, whatever we are most compelled in our own self expression, like, oh, I want to buy more vintage. I want to wear natural fibers. I want to shop less. I want to shop more, but with more intention. Like, whatever everybody's individual goal is, it feels encouraging to me. Let's focus on this huge piece of the 60%, right, that's never really getting worn and going straight into the garbage
Yeah.
by your work through addressing fit, by advancing these technologies, thinking about real bodies in the 3D. Like it just, when you hear all of your expertise and experience in this, it just makes so much sense to start there versus putting it on every single one of us as separate individuals. That's a whole other thing. That can be your next chapter. There's enough to do with what you're building already.
Well,
Yes.
I'm recently appointed head of ASTM's D1366 working group. There's
Okay. I don't know what that is.
It's the Association of Standards for Technical Measurements, and it's the one that people go to the ASTM DD55 group to get sizing measurements, and those are lists of body measurements, and if you're a size 8, these are the measurements for chest, waist, hips, and height. And the list of body measurements that ASTM publishes is not a sufficient list of measurements to design the clothing. That list of measurements is so you can perform QA, quality assurance testing, on garments that have already been finished. And that these garments that are finished should fit someone with these measurements. But that's insufficient list of measurements to design the clothing. So
Mhm.
that's something that I've proposed, and that we're going to come up with a list of recommended measurements for each of these clothing items so that it can actually fit. And that may or may not be reflected in the sizing standards. I don't know. That's a different thing. So maybe an addendum and a recommendation, not a standard. It's a recommendation because everybody's pattern making system is a little bit different. But we would like to recognize that to achieve proper fit, you need to be able to find these anatomical points. And the reason why this is important is because we want to connect 3D to 2D. And without this list of recommended measurements, we're never going to get there. We're just going to chase our tails in that area. So we need something to guide the conversation. I'm head of the committee on data exchange, file formats between apparel design and textile design systems at some product automation. And there's so much automation out there. It's not just apparel. There's a lot of industrial uses for textiles and the data that you have to provide, the design data that travels along with that product. When you send something designed to a cutting table, there's a format there. There's information that the cutting table needs to receive and everything. And it can be gleaned from the design file. It doesn't have to be a separate file. So you have a pair of jeans and it's size 6, and the seam length is going to be like this. So it gets to the robot. It's going to say, oh, I know. I can stop my seam at this point because that's the end, and it's got cameras to verify, right? So you can do that. And then the next one that comes along, oh, this is the same pair of jeans, but it's for somebody who's 6'5". All right. I'm going to adjust my seam length because the information's in the file and I know, right? I, as a robot, can do this because I've been provided the right context and metadata to do my job and adjust to changes in the mix of the product. So you can, as a brand, it doesn't have to be custom fit, but you can boutique sizing, right? So you know who you want to market to because you, as a designer, are an expressive person and you want to reach out to your tribe. That's basically the function of a designer. I have a tribe. I'm going to give you what you need.
Sue, I love your perspective. I love your passion for this. This is the future. I genuinely believe that what you are creating and what you are enabling others to create is the future of fashion. And I am here for it. I know the listeners are here for it. We're here to support you and Seamly. I just think it's an incredible proactive approach. I so appreciate you coming to tell all of us about it. And I could talk to you forever because it's such a fascinating world, but I will let you move on with your day. So tell me, to close our conversation, for everyone listening who maybe not in the fashion design realm themselves, but they're a consumer of fashion and they love fashion, what is one kind of quick tip you can give us on the consumer side to use all the information we heard from you today and maybe think differently or behave a little bit differently in the way that we approach fashion?
I just want to suggest that people start thinking about what they wear as an expression of themselves personally, even if it's what they wear to work, the way that you press your clothes, this is a reflection of who you are as a human. Fashion isn't about the catwalk. I mean, granted, the catwalk is what we all have in our head, but the catwalk is for a brand to throw all the little design elements that it can think of for the next season on a single piece of clothing and it looks weird. And then they put it on a human hanger. Clothes hanger.
Right.
Walk down because there's not supposed to be any conversation between the audience, the buyers, potential buyers, and the model. They're supposed to read those design elements and go, okay, this is what's happening with this brand this season. Is this going to catch fire? Do I want any of that? So am I going to have a conversation with them later about, okay, let's take this design elements and I want these design elements, not this one, but those are good. And I want this. This fits my market. So that's what the catwalk is. The catwalk is not about real fashion. The catwalk is a conversation between buyers and a brand. Forget about it. What real fashion is how you express yourself as a human. And we need to treat it with more respect.
We love self-expression here. That is so much of what this show is all about, is digging into the things we want to learn about the world and also about ourselves so that we can build this muscle and strengthen this self-expression that we crave and it makes us feel so good. So I love that answer. It's the perfect answer. And I agree, what we wear and the way we present ourselves through fashion can be such a powerful language.
It's been a pleasure, Emily. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. It's been lovely to talk with you today.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for listening. Now I want to hear what you learned. DM me on Instagram at Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman or leave a review with your top takeaway. These ratings really do make a difference. If you're not a member of the Curious Life Club yet, you are invited. Visit CuriousLifeOfAChildFreeWoman.com to join the conversation, share suggestions, and be first to know the next curious topic. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.